it's really important that we consider this, because the context of this background helps to shape where we're at today in terms of our regulatory challenges that we're facing, the FAA and where they're headed with unmanned aircraft systems. So we thought it'd be a good idea to back up a little bit, give this a little bit broader perspective, a little bit more thought, because it is so important. I know we all want to go out and fly. We want to go out and put these unmanned aircraft up in the air and get good data, good use out of them, but there are some constraints we need to think about. If we look back, and not quite as far as where Victor went in history, but look back to flying model aircraft as a hobby and the evolving nature of that kind of flight, I call it from hobby to commerce. Even in early days of hobby flying, there was a concern for safety in the national airspace. And our national airspace is the airspace over the country that is used for commerce, for travel, and such. The Federal Aviation Administration is the governmental entity that is responsible for maintaining safety in our skies. And early on in terms of hobby flight, the FAA realized, hey, there's a possible kind of safety issue here with these model aircraft. And they published an advisory circular, number 91-57, about 1981. And essentially one way to think about this is it was not really a regulatory document, but more of a gentleman's agreement with modelers, that as long as the hobby modeling world operates in a safe manner, responsible manner, everybody's going to get along. Everything will be fine. Well, there's other factors that enter into this, and if any of you have ever been to a model RC club flying field, it might not be too long when you're visiting before you see something like this. This confirms that model aircraft are difficult to fly in their more conventional type of technology. And after you spend a fair amount of money and time building an airplane to go out and fly, this is the last thing you want to have happen, is something like this. So just pure economics, as well as perhaps a little bit of pride on the part of the person that built the plane and showing up at the field with it, encouraged individuals to join a community of flyers. A group of like-minded individuals where they can learn how to fly, they can take their airplane up and fly it and bring it back down safely without having to pick up a whole bunch of pieces and losing some financial resources in the same time. So the Academy of Model Aeronautics is a fairly large group. The numbers I see are on the order of about 140,000 members that supports this community of flying in the model world, the remote control modeling world. And the AMA has a National Model Aircraft Safety Code. It's a couple of pages. There's just a little bit of highlight here on this slide. But the main idea is to stay away from airports, always fly below 400-foot elevation above ground level, always keep your aircraft within line of sight, called visual line of sight, never fly over people, and a number of other kind of recommendations and safety kinds of steps that need to be taken to follow the safety code that the AMA has published. Now, what's interesting, and Victor alluded to this, is that, of course, we know there's technical advances that are taking place. And this has led to aircraft that are easy to fly. 3-axis gyros, inertial measurement units, or IMUs, even fail-safety recovery, GPS, our global positioning systems, continue to get smaller and smaller. So as this technology has merged with the RC modeling world, why there are now planes, aircraft, model aircraft, that an individual can go purchase and take it out of the box and go fly it, and not have to worry very much about crashing it and losing that investment. And you can buy these control systems and put them in a model that you build even. So there's been these real advances coming along. And so I mentioned here it's possible to fly an aircraft, and I put in parentheses successfully. That means bring it back for a landing, without the need for training and even interaction with this modeling community. And I use the term community here in quotes because even the new proposed regulations by the FAA reference the idea of a community. So as a result, we have essentially an evolving lack of understanding about the basics of safety in the national airspace, and even perhaps awareness of the Federal Aviation Administration and their responsibility that might otherwise have taken place through engaging with a community of like-minded individuals and learning how to fly. And as you do that, you pick up the safety code and learn that. There's kind of a disconnect that's starting to occur, and that creates some challenges. If we take that kind of disconnect that's beginning to occur, and now we multiply that by considering commercial use of small unmanned aircraft systems, this is clearly beyond the advisory circular that FAA published in 1981. If we take that, and this is kind of a layer of an onion here, and combine that with projected large numbers of small unmanned aircraft systems, and here I've seen different estimates. For example, one estimate is 30,000 small unmanned aircraft systems flying around in our national airspace by the end of this decade, or let's say a short 5 years from now. You know, if you start thinking about this and putting it all together, things become fairly complicated just in and of that itself. And yet we realize that the United States has the most complex airspace in the world. It's a three-dimensional environment out there that aircraft move through. And then we add to that this kind of controlled airspace and what's called the alphabet of airspace. The idea that in order to move through this airspace, aircraft need certain types of equipment, as well as certain communication protocols, depending on what type of airspace you're in and what you're moving through. So again, the layers, the complexity adds up, and it makes sense because general aviation in the United States is very active. We have one of the largest general aviation fleets in the world, and so the FAA, in creating a safe airspace, has had to take steps to manage it very carefully. In terms of agriculture, this is an unmanned aircraft and agriculture learning network. We need to think about our agricultural aviator friends also, for example, the aerial applicators that might be flying their aircraft to apply very much needed chemicals, for example, to manage infestations, pests, and they'll typically be flying fairly low and fairly fast. And those aircraft can be quite valuable, so we need to be careful there also. Well, the FAA is bringing a safety mindset and approach to the regulation of commercial use of unmanned aircraft systems. And that leads us to our current situation and the notice of proposed rulemaking, and the web link is noted here. This, by the way, this is being recorded, and you'll have a chance to go back and take a look at this webinar and grab this kind of information if you're not able to get it right now. But no matter what we look at here, as these small unmanned aircraft systems flourish, they yield the great kinds of results that they have the potential to yield for agriculture. There is general agreement among everybody that a real solution here is education. And that's what this learning network is all about. So where are we headed? Where's this learning network headed? I'll call it kind of a roadmap to unmanned aircraft system education, maybe even use the term sky map, because this is a sectional here. This is what pilots would use. This represents a three-dimensional space, even though it's only a map in 2D. And so that's how you navigate. It's kind of moving through that airspace with those kinds of sectionals. So our learning network then we see as a multimedia approach. Webinars, initially every 2 months with a transition to one per month. And at this point I would like to take the opportunity to invite all of the attendees to consider contributing content and ideas. As Ann mentioned, learning networks are kind of amorphous. They shift, they move, they evolve, and that's certainly what we'd like to see here. And all of you have great ideas, great things going on, and this would be a perfect place to share and learn at the same time. We'd see 2 to 3 agricultural and unmanned aircraft system topics per webinar. So about 15-20 minutes each topic, and kind of explore different applications, research that's going on, ideas, technologies, and such. We also have a website. I mentioned that earlier. This will be kind of a foundational linkage and repository for the content that the Learning Network is developing. It'll be connected to the extension web presence, and it'll support the unmanned aircraft system engagement within the agricultural community. We're working on a conference for the year 2016, next year, and we'd encourage you to keep your eyes out for that. It'll focus on unmanned aircraft systems in agriculture, give a real focus on this topic, as well as presence in the social world, social network world. And we're developing that. That's coming along. We're not quite there yet on that part. As well as a point in the whole learning network that youth education can plug in. We know that's important, that's critical, and so we want to give a location for youth to plug in for youth activities, education, and this would, of course, be in support of STEM types of education. Webinars, again, a little bit more detail on these.
Again, a little bit more detail on these.
Research, agricultural research and applications. And I'm picking up feedback. There we go. That may be better. So agricultural research and applications, crop scouting. I won't go over all these. Precision agriculture with timely management decisions, asset tracking, sensors, various types of sensor platforms that are getting smaller and more sophisticated all the time. Information systems, of course, all this great data is there, but how do you make sense of it? How do you process the image to make decisions? And even economic implications of unmanned aircraft in agriculture. You know, where's this going? Sure like to see some of our friends in agricultural economics join in here and find some answers on this. Perhaps some webinars could address aviation and logistics, since we are in a three-dimensional world of aviation. Basic aviation concepts would be important. If you're going to operate in this world, it's important to know about some of these things. The national airspace, perhaps even preparing for the eventual operator certification exam. That's currently what is in the proposed rules by the FAA, so we'll see if that actually remains there, but if it does, maybe we'll look at preparing for that. Safety and privacy always come up with unmanned aircraft. Oh, how about deciding on an unmanned aircraft system? Are you interested, would a fixed-wing system be the best for your application, a multi-rotor? Maybe a hobby or even prosumer could do the job that you're looking for, or the clientele that you're working with. Flight characteristics and navigation systems. All this is emerging, it's moving fast, and we'd see webinar content that helps to deal with it. Regulations are there, they're a reality, and so we probably ought to devote some attention to them. We might, for example, look at Section 333 exemptions for commercial use, and how would you go about applying for something like this? Or a site-specific COA or blanket COA. What's the application process? Insurance is an issue in unmanned aircraft systems. For institutions, such as land-grant institutions, the unmanned aircraft is probably going to be operating under the Public Aircraft Statute. And so what is that? What does that entail? What's that mean? As well as the new Notice of Proposed Rules and Regulations. But not only a review of them, but what are the implications of these proposed rules that are on the horizon that the FAA is currently working on? Just a quick word on these. The Notice of Proposed Rules was published February 15th, 2015. They're set to limit the size, speed, and range of unmanned aircraft. They will involve testing, certification, and vetting for unmanned aircraft operators, so there is going to be some requirements. And there are restrictions in the airspace around airports, among other locations. So there's an interesting kind of potential here, though, and this was put in place to address the large demand for commercial use of unmanned aircraft. And the FAA established an interim policy that provides exemptions, that's these Section 333 exemptions, for certain unmanned aircraft system operators while the final rule is being developed. So this might be something to consider. Under this interim policy, the FAA will grant a certificate of authorization for flights at or below 200 feet, and this is a kind of a blanket COA, to UAS operators that have been granted an exemption. And that's noted there in red because you do have to have that exemption for aircraft and operations that meet the criteria set forth in the proposed rule. This blanket 200-foot COA would allow flight anywhere in the country except restricted airspace and other limited areas, such as populated areas, where the FAA prohibits unmanned aircraft system operations. So there's a bit of an open door there. You just have to be careful how you go through it. And that's kind of where we're at in terms of these the ability to fly unmanned aircraft.